Hey everyone, and welcome back. If you are new, welcome. My name is Shelly, and here is all about books. And today we have another commentary. I'm very excited. This topic, I think it's gonna be fun because I think it's a bit spicy, something controversial. And I think it will be interesting because it is kind of bouncing off something that we spoke about last year. Um, Honestly, hmm, whatever it is, I said what I said. You guys know how I am. Like, I've done my research, I have my opinions, and I'm about to stand on it. And that question is long form literature dying? And is book talk partly to blame? In the past, I think reading was seen as this intellectual exercise. It might have just been a perception, it might have been a fact, who knows? But I think it was seen as this way to expand your mind, to engage with complex narratives, and really to wrestle with big ideas. But now we're kind of in this age of, fast, digestible, aesthetic driven reading, because like book talk thrives on quick reviews, viral moments, and honestly short form attention spans. um and yeah, so today I want us to break it down. I want us to break down, like, is book talk making people read less intellectually challenging books? Are we losing the patience for longer, denser novels? Is this actually a bad thing? We can't like not discuss that. Or are we just seeing reading evolve? So I really want to get in. Obviously, I said that it touches on what I spoke about a few months ago when we spoke about, book talk and anti-intellectualism. And I think it's very closely linked. And I just wanted to kind of dive a bit deeper with this video. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about the now reading culture. Once upon a time, guys, before book talk, before Goodreads, reading was, it was, I think, a deeply personal experience. Like, even in the instances when I read when I was younger, like, it was really, yeah, I feel like it was a deeply personal experience. Like, people read in solitude, they had their thoughts, and then maybe discussed the book with a friend or in a book club. Now, I think with book talk and Goodreads, reading has become a bit performative for some. Even with the way that we conduct ourselves on our social media accounts that have to do with books, we're saying now reading blank, 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 blank with a matching aesthetic playlist. You'll see that on someone's page, on someone's story. We'll have the reading updates. We have that with our apps. And our reading apps, a lot of them, have made the apps be more social so you can have like a community driven side to your reading. I'm 25% through so and so. I'm obsessed, doing all the reading updates. Even when you're just updating people on, the books that you bought. Oh, did I just buy 12 books from Barnes and Nobles even though I have 75 unread books at home? Yes. Do I regret it? No. Like, there's a very social aspect to reading now. Like, it's different. As someone who didn't grow up reading, like I said, I had to look my little stint. It's different. And social media, as we know, has changed not just reading, it's changed everything in our lives. So we can't just say that it's just reading. But looking at this, it's kind of like reading isn't just about the book itself anymore. It's about the experience, and obviously reading has always been an experience. What I mean by it's about the experience, I mean like the aesthetic, the vibes, the community. And those aren't necessarily bad things, because I get it, all of these things, they make reading fun. The community definitely makes reading fun. The aesthetic, I haven't really cared too much about reading aesthetics, to be fair, so I can't really speak on that, but I know people enjoy it. But here's the thing, you don't see too many deep dives into books anymore. It kind of seems like people are reading just to say they read it, just to say, oh, I'm going to make this entire book my personality now. But did you actually go into the book, understand what it was talking about? Do you even remember the story and the plot? Where are the patience for books, that aren't instant dopamine hits? Some people are getting through books just to like say, okay, I've read about 3 books today. And we've spoken about this before on this channel, the just reading to hit quotas. Like, when was the last time BookTok made like 1,000-page literary novel go viral? We have, like, the 1,000-page fantasy books, 1,000-page romance books that don't need to be 1,000 pages. We have all of those. But when you think about it, it isn't just an old versus young thing. Like, it's literally a cultural shift. We live in the age of instant gratification. We all know this. Like, even with the things that we buy, not just books, but like clothes, food, you can get your grocery ordered immediately. You can go on Amazon and get something to your door the same day sometimes. Then, with books, you can order it, comes the next day. But, you have these now long, complex books. They take time, they take effort, especially if you're taking your time to actually absorb everything that is being said, even analyze everything that's being said, to take your time to go through it. And with instant gratification, all that time and effort, it's becoming less appealing, essentially. So, truly, let's talk about the decline of these difficult books. I'm only 20 something years old, I'm not, so I was, here in the 90s, but not all of the 90s. But I do know that, like, in the 90s, even in the early 2000s, like, literary fiction dominated, and it dominated everywhere. It dominated bestseller lists, and writers like Toni Morrison, who, I've been seeing a lot of people like scream about her. I haven't read her book yet. Any of her books yet, but she's on my list. I have a very, very long TBR, guys. Don't judge me. Yeah, but writers like Toni Morrison, Donna Tartt, like, they were cultural icons. I remember, like, the freaking out of Donna Tartt when she, released The Goldfinch. And at that point, I had read The Secret History, and I'm just like, ooh, okay, what else you got? What else you got? But yeah, their books were like these long, intricate reads that required actual effort to like go in, and especially when it came to like their plots, they were so complex. Actually understanding, what was being said, and what the story is telling you, and how it's making you reflect. Oh, it was a lot. Today now, the bestsellers they're shorter, they're faster, they are more emotionally engaging, yes. And they definitely are more plot driven, but obviously we know this literary fiction a lot of times are very character driven, and commercial fiction is usually like plot driven, and that's not bad. That's actually not bad. There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, the books that demand a bit more patience, books that sometimes challenge readers and not necessarily are just there to entertain them, people are struggling to pick those books up, which means those books are struggling to be picked up, by publishers, by bookstores. Those books are struggling. Literary fiction sales are down, like, that's a fact. And publishers are prioritizing more BookTok friendly books over the slow burn literary works. Like, even in the fantasy genre, we've moved past, and I really wanted to actually do a deeper dive into this topic itself and have a whole other video on it, but we can talk about that later. But yeah, with fantasy books, like, even me who got into fantasy recently, I'm making like my journey through epic fantasy, and a lot of those epic fantasies were written in the 90s and the 2000s, like, a while ago, not too long ago still. But yeah, when you read them and then you read the current fantasy books, you're kind of seeing the change. Like, you see that we've moved from like expansive world building heavy series, and even for the series that I haven't read the books, but know about them and watch the movie, you can tell, like, books like Lord of the Rings and Dune, just from the movies you can tell that the world building would have been expansive. But even as I'm reading Assassin's Apprentice and Aragon, and starting Mistborn, you can see that it's extensive world building heavy series. But we're moving from those, and we're going to like romanticy driven character first plots. You have obviously one of the biggest culprits, Fourth Wing and its sequels, and yeah, I don't have too much that are popping in my mind right now, but yeah, it was the first thing that came to mind. But yeah, you get the gist of what I'm saying. I get it as well. I get where that shift has come from as a fantasy reader. BookTok pushes what sells, but then you have to think about what's the cost. At what cost are we pushing these popular books? Just to sell more. Are we becoming impatient readers? Are we losing our tolerance for books that take 200 pages to get good? Because I have seen several book talkers who have said, listen, If I'm 50 pages in and there's no action, I'm out. If like people don't get to page 100, like let alone 200. Some people are just like, you got about 20 pages to pull me in. As I'm reading Assassin's Apprentice, I literally clocked that like the first chapter, was it the first chapter? Or yeah, it took like not ages, but yeah, ages actually. Yeah, it took a minute. It took a minute. And the thing is, the book looked small, so I was just like, I'm like, okay, this is old school fantasy, but it's a small book. I opened that book, that text was like this, right? And this brings you back to the video, the anti-intellectualism video, where the young girl, she spoke about the text being really really small. And I remember so many people telling me maybe she's just talking about the format, maybe she just needs bigger text. But no, in her actual video, in her when she, if you watch the video all the way to the end, no, she was speaking about the fact that there were so many backstories, that the plot was too intricate. She's just, I just want fights, I just want people to like be fighting, I just want to get to the action. And this is my point. You see, it takes a while when you read like the older school fantasies. And obviously like not just older school, some fantasies nowadays are really really good. They take a while to get to the action, to the part that some people would count as fantasy, to the fighting, to the sword throwing, to the dragon flying, whatever the book is about. And nowadays people can't wait that long. When was the last time a like 500 plus page literary novel became a BookTok sensation? And I can't remember. And even if there have been books that have become literary sensations being 500 plus pages, how many times has it happened? Don't tell me tomorrow, and tomorrow. I remember that book, didn't read it. I said I remembered it. I said I didn't read it. The reason I didn't read it is because it's been on my list, and I'll get to it eventually. Once again, my TBR is very very long. So I can't really comment on that book. I don't even know if it was good. But I mean, I've heard things. I heard it was okay. But yeah, it's not very normal for literary novels that you would think would be critically acclaimed would become a BookTok sensation. It's not very common at all. It's actually very very weird. And if that were to happen, I'd be like, ooh, wow. Once in a blue moon. I guess the blue moon is outside, essentially. But let's go deeper, okay? Is this just a preference change, or is something bigger happening? When I was doing my research on this, because even when I had done the video a few months ago, I was just like, I really want to go deeper into this whole topic. I was actually looking at some studies, and actual studies say that social media is rewiring our brain. And I feel like most people kind of guessed that. I feel like most people were just like, yeah, we already knew that. But from these studies, basically, it speaks about how short form content is shortening our attention spans. Once again, I feel like a lot of people have guessed that. Fast dopamine hits make slow books feel boring, which is why people can't last past 50 pages. And people are reading more books than ever, but finishing fewer. And I thought this was really, really interesting, especially because there's been a lot of conversation about like how many books people read in a year. And that is a conversation for another day, because people can read a lot of books. Some people are fast, some people da 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 da. But yeah, people are reading more books, but they're not finishing them because there are a lot of DNFs. Now, I support DNFs because honestly, if you're suffering, right? If you're suffering through a book, don't put yourself through that mental anguish, because that can be the cause of a book slump a lot of the time. But at the same time, there is a question of like, why are you suffering through the book? Is the book like generally written bad, or are you like reading a book that's actually good, but you are just so impatient and you can't wait to page 150 or whatever for the book to get good? I think that we do probably need to ask a bit more questions, especially when it comes to things like those DNFs. But if we think about how BookTok functions, you have the 15-second, this book ruined me, this book wrecked me, this book was the best book of my life, all in 15 seconds. You have them screaming about the book, but then like a lot of the time they don't explain why. Now we do have more longer videos, especially because TikTok is encouraging the 60-second plus videos, and people are just like, I'm trying to get my point, so I'm going to try and make longer videos. But even then, they do not explain too much about what happened in the book, because you have 60 seconds, plot, story, character development, pace, writing style. Like there's a lot to analyze in 60 seconds. Okay, and there's also this factor of people speed reading, how many books a month, but forgetting half of them. I remember even I used to joke about this, like, oh, don't ask me about any of the books that I read this month, that's in the past. But let's be real, I do remember my books. I'm gonna just say this now. I do remember my books. But yeah, there's the whole like, getting through books just so that you have that number. Oh, I read 12 books in a month. I read 55. I don't know if someone's ever read 55 books in a month, but that'd be cool if you did. Once again, do you remember anything you've read? Question for another day, I'm guessing. And there's also like those books with like shock factor twist that people are pushing, and these books are winning over the slow burn narrative. Now, I've said it before 1,000 times over. I love fast paced books. I do love fast paced books, it's true. But you can always tell, even if a book is so slow paced, you can always tell, or not always, but like you commit to a book. Even if it's slow paced, you're just like, okay, let me just read and see where it's going. And if the writing is good, this can be this can be a snail's pace, and I'm sticking with it, I want a good narrative. I want storytelling to be at the forefront. I want your writing style to captivate me. Okay. I want the world building to be so intricate. I sleep and I dream that I'm there. That does happen. Like reading is becoming more about the experience than the actual content is what we're seeing. And so like, things that can make people emotional, things that can make people shocked, and things that can make people jump out of their seats and yell at the camera, that's what's more popular, the shock factor. Anything that's slow burn, yeah, for the first 200 pages in the book, we were learning about the world, we were learning about the magic system, we were learning about the history, we were learning like people won't tune into that. And so a lot of times people aren't reading that. And that's where the TikTok brain debate comes in. Are we training ourselves to lose patience for deep, long form storytelling? And you really have to be like, there's a point to that question, I know that classic literature struggles on BookTok unless it's hyper dramatic or dark academia aesthetic focus. And we're going to have a discussion about how classic literature has seen like this resurgence on BookTok among the Gen Zs, like, and that's great. But then once again, there is this point of it grabbing people for a certain reason. You have books like War and Peace, that some people are picking up, but back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I mean last year, it wasn't going to be the book that trend because it wasn't spicy fantasy. I know that older people and people who have been reading for years, people who were fans of the epic fantasy books, I've seen so many comment about how they worry that the younger audiences aren't engaging with complex narratives anymore, and it's like making things very, very dangerous, because what is the state of reading and literature going to be in the future? And honestly, I see their point. Like, are they wrong when they worry about things like this? But then there's also the other side of things where it's kind of just like, is this just how storytelling evolves? We can't think that the storytelling of today is going to be the same as storytelling in the the 20th century or even the 19th century. What about all the way back in the 15th century? Do we think that it was the same? No. Like, if we look at Shakespeare's storytelling, we can see how different it is. But is that shift really good is another question that we should be asking. And so as we are looking at all of this, we have to ask ourselves, is there a reason to be concerned? Is this bad? On one hand, reading is reading. Okay. Like, I feel like a lot of people have used this when talking about topics like this. Reading is reading. If BookTok gets people excited about books, I've seen this a lot of my comments. If BookTok gets people excited about books, who cares if they're shorter, faster, or emotionally driven? Who cares what the content is? I hear it because you're getting people to read, and you're getting people to take in books, and that's great. Even like with the resurgence of classical literature, that's absolutely amazing. But on the other hand, if we only read books that are easy, fast, entertaining, are we losing something? Like, you have to think about, like, are we going to start seeing fewer books that challenge readers because authors are aware that publishers aren't going to pick it up because they know that people aren't reading them? And even if authors are writing those books, like, will we ever hear about them? Because they won't blow, we won't see them, what's going to happen. And I think when it comes to topics like this, my viewpoint or my question has always kind of been, you know, will future generations struggle with books that require patience? And I don't remember if I fully mentioned this in the last video on anti-intellectualism, but I think a lot of us saw that article when about the college students who admitted that they had never finished a book. About like college students not being able to read, and you see that's the issue there. Are we really dumbing down literature, or are we evolving it? And I think there's a line. And we have to figure out, have we crossed it yet? My take is that it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. I don't think long form literature is dead. I don't. But I do think it is struggling. Like, I I've seen my own reading journey. Like I said, my reading journey, my true reading journey, when I really like started to love reading, didn't start too long ago. And obviously, I started with I told you guys when I was younger, started with classic lit, and then started reading more commercialized fiction. And when you when I look at like my reading journey, I look at the books that I've read, there's a mix. I have some lit fic in there. I have fantasy, a lot. Obviously, I love fantasy, so I'm a fantasy reader. And I look at the fantasy books that I've read. I've read some absolutely amazing ones, yes. And I can always tell kind of just like the difference in books. And I can obviously find enjoyment in like the fast-paced emotional books. Like we've said, like there's nothing wrong with finding enjoyment in them. But I read a balance of books, and I think that's why I can always kind of tell the difference when I'm reading a book that's kind of just like, oop, the quality is a bit different. I can always kind of tell. I can still hype up a book. I can still love it. I can still give it a great rating based on emotions, but I can recognize that, not the best, but I can still engage with long form fiction. It wasn't hard for me to pick up Assassin's Apprentice. It wasn't hard when it took like, 200 pages for the plot just to get moving. Like, it wasn't hard at all. I am used to engaging with long form literature, probably because of like, uni. But it's not something that bothered me. I like fast paced books, but the slow paced ones don't bother me, especially when I see good writing, when I am taking in good writing. When that writing is spectacular, I actually enjoy it being slow. I want to feel every moment. I want to be able to take in the world as it's being built across those like 500 pages. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I think on a whole, long form literature is struggling. Most of the books are short, and if they are longer, they won't be picked up, or they have bigger text so that people can actually get through them quicker. I think BookTok has definitely made reading more accessible, but I think it has come at the cost of a reader's patience. So I think that's difficult. And I also think that I don't think that we're actually dumbing down books, but I think what's popular nowadays aren't the more complex books. I think we're shifting toward a different kind of reading culture where the ones that aren't too complex are the ones that will grab people in more. So I do think that we should push back against the idea that books need to be viral, fast, and emotional to be valuable, because I think that's a very dangerous precedence to set. But I do think that literature in general should be more than just aesthetic or digestible, because yeah, literature can give you so much. Literature can help you grow in in so many areas of your life. And so I don't think that we should really just focus on, how fast a book is, how viral it is, how emotional it is, how it made me feel, what are we taking from it, I think is another aspect that we should look into when reading books. But that's just me. And as always, I want to know what you guys think. So, like, do you think that we're losing the patience for longer, more complex books? Or do you really just think it's just how reading changes with time, and it's not necessarily a bad thing? But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Really excited to hear from you guys. Bye.